Hello and welcome to another episode of Battle Ready.
Already.
Where today, I saw on the YouTubes, and I'll link it up over here, a great video by Mini Wargaming talking about, they've been doing a whole series talking about game design. It's sort of cool. But one of the things, that topics they had was, what if we use dice other than six-sided? Because there are other sides of dice.
Heresy.
There's 4s, 8s, 10s, 12s, even 20.
Heresy.
And a lot of games, I mean, D&D, at least second edition when I played, used all those dice. And I think they still do. A lot of role-playing systems use a D20 system. A lot use D10s. I did a lot of role-playing that used a D10 system. There's games, miniature games that use other dice, or even special dice.
100-side dice.
Well, but I mean, dice with like special symbols. So Warhammer, Age of Sigmar, and 40K have really sort of just stuck with six-sided. I guess in Warhammer Underworlds, they have special dice that have special symbols on them.
But they're still six-sided.
They are still six-sided, but you can't just go get a bunch of dice, right? Because you have their special ones. And so the thought was, well, should Age of Sigmar, Warhammer use different dice? Now, some of this discussion I think is completely theoretical, because I don't think they're ever going to move away from the D6. Mm-hmm. D6 is sort of like just it's part of it. Rolling a bucket full of dice, throwing out a lot of DACA, right?
DACA.
That's just part of Warhammer. So I don't think that it will change, but would it be a good thing to change? Drake, what say you? No. Why not?
Because I feel like the D6 system, if they change to a D10, it sort of feels like they'd just be copying what everyone else does.
I don't know that everyone else does that. I think there's a lot of systems out there that use sixes.
Mm-hmm. But it'd be like another mini.
But what if everybody else is better? Why not copy and make it better?
No, D6s just seem better to me.
Why?
Because it's because on a 4-up, that's a 50-50 chance.
But well, on a D10, you'd know that on a 6-up, right? Right?
Well.
So one of the things people say is that, all right, if you want to give modifiers, +1, right? If you do +1 on a D6, so you go from hitting on 4s to hitting on 3s, that's a big jump. Mm-hmm. You just went up from a 50-50 chance to a 2/3 chance, right? But if you were doing it on 10s or 12s, then +1, like let's say 12s, +1 would be almost like saying you get a half a plus on a D6, right? And so you could have more modifiers, right? You wouldn't have to limit to plus or -1 only, right? You could have other effects. You could stack things. You could have a lot of terrain that made an impact, and it would, giving a +1 here or +1 there wouldn't be as consequential on a D10 or D12 as it is on a D6. What do you think about that?
That's exactly why I say D6 is better. It makes things that do that a lot more important.
Well, I tend to agree. I sort of like the D6. I think that there are let me say that again. I think that there are definitely advantages to other dice systems, right? So I'm not saying that D6 is the end-all, be-all superior system. But one of the things that's sort of neat about it is that it restricts the design space. And so, they could come up with 1,000 different ways to get a +1. But frankly, once the first one kicks in, since it can only go plus or -1 anyway, you sort of just forget about the rest, right? And I think that makes the game a lot easier to play. I think it reduces the mental load because you don't have to remember all the potential pluses and minuses. Because once you get to one, you're basically done, right? So I think that's good. And I think that it's easier for new players to get into because they don't have to remember a long list. So, for example, I played briefly a role-playing game called Shadowrun in its 3rd edition, maybe. Oh my gosh, that game was thematically, setting-wise, super cool, but mechanically
awful.
Oh. The mechanically was just ridiculous. Several different systems. Oh, you're on a car chase? That's a completely different system from spellcasting, which is a completely different system from this other kind of spellcasting, which is a completely different system from hacking, which is a completely different system from running drones. It was nightmarish. And then Car Chase was a great example because it's like, well, you have to do a drive check, but then it has to be opposed by their drive check. But then here's a whole table of different plus or minuses to yours, and then here's a whole separate table of plus or minuses to theirs. And so by the time you had it all figured out, it took you 15 minutes to do one die roll. It was ridiculous. So even though it was very cool, and even though it accounted for a lot of little scenarios, it was just a slog to play. It was really hard to play. So I think that having the D6 that just sort of caps out at plus or minus 1, I think that's a better system. What else do you like about the D6?
I like that with the D6, for me at least, it seems like, all right, I'm limited from a 1 to 6, so I know that, so I can, at least for me, I could sort of define what's going to be good. Whereas on a D10, like a 6, a 6, I've got like 4 more numbers that could be better.
Sure, I guess. But I mean, I guess you could have it in and say, all right, something that hits now on 4s and 4s, maybe it's 6s and 6s. That's exactly the same on a D10, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you get a plus, now it's hitting on 5s and 5s, which is better, but not as good on a D6 as hitting 3s and 3s. So it gives you more granularity, more knobs to tweak, right? I think that D6s are good just also because they're really easy to get a hold of. You can get 6-siders very cheaply, very easily. And you can also get like super fancy ones too if you're into that. But when it comes to different sided dice, none of them are super expensive, but it can be hard to get like 50 D12s. You know, like that can be harder. One thing they said in the video that I watched that was interesting is they said, all right, part of the reason we do a hit and a wound is because we only have a D6, right? So you have to roll it twice to sort of get the math to line up. Whereas with a D10 or a D12, maybe you only have to roll the hit. You don't have to roll the wound anymore. What do you think about that? What if we had a D10s or D12s and then you could take away the wounding roll? So you didn't even have to worry about that. It was all hits.
Now, see, I would point this to a different argument we'd had over if the ability for a tiny little grot to stab Nagash was good, where we would like the wound roll. And that's where I'm pointing to. If we only had a hit, if a grot managed to stab big old Nagash, he would just take damage from a tiny little grot.
For sure, but you could have a different system involved, right? Where you could say, all right, maybe strength and toughness isn't the best to use here.
Yeah, because
but you could say if something is so much bigger, then you get a -3 to your hit roll or -4 to your hit roll, you know, whatever. And that way it is really hard for a little tiny grot to stab Nagat because now they're only hitting on 10s, right? And so that suddenly it's like, oh, that's going to be hard for that grot, right? That's worse than hitting on 6s on a 6-sider, right? Because that's a 1 in 6 chance.
Mm-hmm. That's a 1 in 10 chance.
That's a 1 in 10 chance, right? So there's still stuff you could do. But what would you think about you use bigger dice, but in general, you only have 1 roll?
I still think D6s are better.
Why is that?
It might just be because I'm used to the D6s, but I just like them more.
I think that's certainly part of it, right? But I think that's true for a lot of people, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people have rolled D6s since their Monopoly days, right? And they're like, okay, yeah, this feels comfortable, this feels familiar, it feels cool having those dice in your hand. And so they don't want to change. And I think there's definitely some of that. There's just how iconic it is with the D6s. Definitely. For me, I think I prefer the D6 just because they're easy to acquire, they're very simple to understand, and I'm not sure that a D12, let's say, with more modifiers is a good idea. Now, maybe in like a skirmish game, maybe something small, you only have 5 guys to a side. Now, since you only have 5 dudes, maybe remembering a lot more modifiers is easier. But if I have a gajillion army dudes, you know, I've got 10 units out there, 9, 10 units, whatever, and I have to remember all those different modifiers for all the different ones, it starts to get a little bit of a slog. It starts to get a little bit down. So I think at least at the Age of Sigmar level, at least at that army level, I think D6s with fewer modifiers just lets you get to the game faster, and which is good because the game is already not fast. And anything you did to make it slower and take longer is probably the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
If they were going to change, let's say they said, all right, we're not using D6s for 4.0. We're just not doing it.
No.
But we'll take a vote. What die would you like to see? What do you think?
I don't know why, but to me, they all seem equally bad.
They all seem bad?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. You have not played enough Dungeons and Dragons. That's what that is, because
I have played 2 missions.
I have many fond memories of many different sides of dice. But yeah, I think I would see, part of it is hard because I think I would lean towards D10s because it's easy to calculate the probabilities, right? On a 7-up, you're like, oh, that's a 40% chance. So since you have the percentage, it's easy to calculate the percentages. It's easy to sort of make adjustments. And I played a lot of role-playing games that used a D10 system, and I found that it worked really well. I really liked it. So some of that is familiarity. Some of that is the fact that the percentages work real well. I could see it moving to a 10-sider system and then being a little bit more free with buffs. So some things could get a +1, some really strong things could get a +2, right? And so you have a little bit more leeway there. And would you need a wound roll on a 10s? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe you say no wound roll, but certain things get minuses depending on how high apart they are on toughness or something. You can make whatever system. But 10s feel good in the hand. 10s are relatively easy to get, but nothing beats 6s.
One more point I might have in 6's favor.
Okay.
Or 2. So the first point is their numbers are easier to read. The bigger the dice get, the smaller the numbers are.
So on 10-siders, they just use numerals.
Yeah,
so
that's what I'm saying.
But no, they just write the 5. So it's not like you're counting up 8 pips for an 8.
I know.
Just an 8.
That's what I'm saying. The numbers.
How is that hard to read?
On a 20-sider, the number is this big.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, 10s, it's not bad on 10s. And 20s are
small. 20s
are probably a little small when you're looking across the table. If you're rolling 5 20s for your hits and your opponent has to see what they are, I could see that's a little small. I don't think 10s have that problem. 12s, I don't know, maybe 12, but I think 10s are pretty easy.
The second point I have in the favor of 6s is it's probably relatively harder to bump them. Because if you think about a 20-sided, they are much more circular.
That's certainly true. You
10-sided can be like.
Yep, you end up with less wobbles on a 6-sided. The fewer sides, right? On a 4-sided,
it's a triangle. You cannot wobble.
Yeah, it's a pyramid. It does not wobble. So yeah, I think so. So it seems to me, Drake, that you're pretty ride or die, live by the 6, die by the 6.
Live by the 6, die by the 6.
So that's cool, and I'm sure there's lots of people out there like that. I think if I had to pick, I would stick with 6s, but I really do see a lot of benefit from something like a 10 or maybe even a 12. I think that would open the design space a little bit to do some other interesting things. And are those other interesting things worth the change? Maybe. I'm going to say maybe. So if you have strong or even weak opinions on the number of sides the dice should have, go ahead and drop it in the comments. Now, like I said, I think that D6s are here to stay. I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon, at least for Age of Sigmar. Maybe Kill Team or Warcry or something like that will be different. But at least for Age of Sigmar, probably 40K, we're dealing with 6s. But if you were in charge and you could nuke it, what would you replace it with? Let us know in the comments below. This has been another episode of Battle Ready.
Ready.
Thanks so much for watching.